Yes,
So, Nivedita, last time we were discussing about my visit to Australia,
right.
telling you that I had met all these ex-servicemen from India,
Yes,
Indo-Indians, Christians, some others who decided to leave India after it got its independence because they felt that they may not be given a fair deal since during the British Raj, they've been riding the high horse, as one might say. Anyway, I met them, and now many of them had a lot of problems of pension and settlement of accounts, etc., from the Indian government
yeah.
and from the Indian Pay and Accounts Office. So I took all these details, and when we came back to India, we started sorting this out. Now, this takes time because the pay and account system for the military is very efficient as far as the salaries are concerned. But when your pensions and all that and problems have to be sorted, then nothing happens. It takes years, nothing happens. It's based on Allahabad, where the Audit and Accounts Office, manned by civilians, is concerned, and they only want to work when they feel like it and not otherwise. So one has to chase the system, find files in their dusty godowns, etc., to get things going, which we did. And eventually I asked their leader, who was a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army Service Corps, to come to India and accept the final settlement for a large number of them. And I'm glad to say we managed to get a fair amount of this settled. Now, while I was in Canberra, I must tell you that I was also invited to meet what would be called the strategic think tank. Now, many countries have had this, especially the Western world. You have strategic tanks at government level run between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense. They have they write papers, etc., for the type of actions that may be necessary by government in due course of time to meet the strategic influences that might obtain in the next few years. Now, India, we have started that only when I was retiring from the job of the army chief. I put this case up again and again. And then, most reluctantly, people decided to start what is known as the National Security Advisory Board, which we have now, which advises the National Security Advisor. India never had one earlier. Now we've got a National Security Advisor for the Prime Minister, so that because government is very busy doing their routine governance, and the problems arise every day and every few months, there are new problems coming up in the world, and they get so involved in that they don't see what is happening, which is going to affect them in the next few years. So this board really looks at the future if they can, and they write papers on this. Some of these papers are accepted, others are not. Anyway, this was the first occasion when I had the opportunity of meeting a group like this. The chairman was the retired foreign secretary, a very senior bureaucrat, rather diplomat, and there were about 8 or 9 of them, and they wanted to discuss with me what I saw of the future of India, and for that matter, what I saw of the future of Australia from my point of view. Now, while we're discussing this, the question of enhancing the economy of a country before anything else can be done, we considered most important. Because unless the economy is good, you cannot have a good military force, nor can you have a good strategic influence amongst your neighbors in the rest of the world. So this requires good governance and very good management of the economy, and not too much dissension within the country itself. Now, that's a tall order, as you can see, that many countries have a lot of dissension in their own country. And by the time they're sorting that out, they don't have much time to think about what's happening across their borders. Anyway, when I was discussing this, a very interesting point came up because Australia said that our economy, these people said, that our economy is going to be very, very successful. I said, why do you say that? He said, look at this huge country called China. And this chairman of theirs told me that, General, you don't see that if we can sell one pair of socks to every Chinese, the economy of Australia will be booming. So I told him, I said, I don't agree with you. It's not you who's going to sell socks to China. It is China which is going to send socks to you. Their socks will not only be enough for the whole of the Australian population, which is very small, but it'll be at least 50% of the price that you can do. Because they have controlled labor and they can produce stuff in masses, which you cannot do. So I said, cut out this vision of yours of selling stuff to China. China is going to sell to you. You have to better look out for it. This was long ago. I mean, I'm talking of 1988. This is December 1988, after our Maldives up. And things have changed tremendously. As you can see now, the relations of Australia with China are not that good. Shrupi and I also went and visited Brisbane because I wanted to see this so-called quick reaction division that the Australians had. And I must say they were very well organized. And the trouble with organizations of this nature is that you've got a military and you've got a good organization like the Quick Reaction Division in Brisbane, but then politically you're not prepared to use it, so what's the point of it? You have to be politically prepared to use it, especially with the principles that you must attain in the government regarding the various South Pacific islands which are within the jurisdiction of Australia. I told that to the commander, and he said, well, I'm only a military officer. I have to wait for my orders. I said, yes, fine. Meanwhile, they keep training to do all sorts of interesting things. Mark you, during World War II and World War I, Australia and New Zealand produced a few divisions called the ANZAC division in World War II, Australia-New Zealand division, which functioned very well in Southern Europe, Italy, Mesopotamia, and all these places. They're very good fighters, and they are well trained. We also have Australian officers attending our staff college in Wellington, whom I had the pleasure of meeting, not only when I was a student, but when I was an instructor at staff college. And I must say they're very well trained, but they're very small in numbers. We came back from Australia after a very good visit and creating a lot of good relations. The government, I think, was very keen, even at that time, to make good friends with India, because they did feel that, you know, if you look at the Indian Ocean, India is in the middle of the northern side of the Indian Ocean, and Australia is on the eastern flank of the Indian Ocean. And of course, South Africa is on the western flank, with the eastern coast of Africa. So, relationship between the countries bearing on the Indian Ocean is very important, which I think this present government is doing a lot of work on that. To have the diaspora of the people, the countries all around the Indian Ocean to come to talks, to discussions, to various types of thinking on maintaining peace and good trade. Another point about the Indian Ocean, since it's very, very important indeed geographically, is that the entry points to the Indian Ocean are very few. One is from the Mediterranean Sea on the northwest, where you come through the Suez Canal and through the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean. That's the Gulf of Aden. The other is after the south of South Africa. That's the old route, which people like Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese captain, came to Goa and all that sort of thing. They used to follow that route. These are the two main entrances from the western side. From the eastern side, there are mainly the entrance from Southeast Asian islands like the Malacca Straits, which is between Malaysia and Surabaya of Indonesia. And they also to go through the Indonesian islands between Jakarta and Surabaya, and you come through the Sunda Strait, etc., which are deep water straits. You can come into the Indian Ocean from there. Then you can come to Indian Ocean from south of Australia. That's a difficult area because the southern seas are full of storms, but anyway, that is an entry point. So therefore, Australia is really looking at the southeastern end of the Indian Ocean and the entry points therein. So we do require good relations between Australia, India, and the Eastern African states and South Africa to maintain peace in this region and also control. Of course, you may be knowing that the Americans have a large base in the Indian Ocean in the island called the Jogagassia, which was earlier held by UK, by England, and then handed over to the Americans. And this is in the southern Indian Ocean, a very large base where they could be capable of interfering with any hostile actions that they deem hostile. They've also got a presence in the Persian Gulf, where the oil states are because they're interested in the oil. And they've also got a presence in the Philippines, which is the eastern end of the entry to the Indian Ocean. So America feels, and the South China Sea, as I might say. So trade-wise in the world so far, never data. If you see any trade from Europe or America towards the east, either you have to cross the Pacific Ocean or you have to cross the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean is a much smaller one. So therefore, trade from the Gulf is mostly oil, which is a very important item. As I told you earlier once, that almost every nautical mile of the Indian Ocean has got a couple of oil tankers going from the Persian Gulf to all over the world, and also to China and to Japan. You notice how we are sitting on top of these trade routes. Now we wait and see in the future what happens to the Arctic Ocean. I've said this to you before, because as the world warms up and the northern areas of Russia and the tundra regions start melting as they started melting, many people say the areas of green grass coming up where there used to be frozen snow. Well, there is a possibility of the Arctic Ocean opening up. So that's another route between the east and the west, which is much smaller than the Indian Ocean. That's a future strategic concept of how trade will function and how will the countries manage the trade. We wait and see where that goes. Now, I'll go back. When we came back from India, we had an interesting visit in India. I got contacted by a British retired Field Marshal, Lord Burgess, I think his name was. He's in charge of what is known as the British League. Now, these people look after ex-servicemen and widows and all that of retired military personnel, Army, Navy, and Air Force. We don't have a similar organization in India. But here, what the British government has done, and I think is a very good organization, they pay the salary and office staff and upkeep of the head of the British Legion, in which they select a retired officer. And in my time, it was this Lord Burgess who was manning this job. He told me that he, of course, is under government salary, but he's the only person. Then they collect funds from the public and from others to assist ex-servicemen and their families and the widows of those who were lost in battle. Plus, they look after the various graveyards that the British have in areas of the world where the British Army had functioned. These could be in Turkey, the Gallipoli of World War I. They could be in Egypt. They could be in Palestine. They could be in Tunisia. They could be in Libya. And a large number of these in India, Kohima, Guwahati, Imphal, the eastern side, because the Japanese invasion was taking place in World War 1944-45, and British Indian Army functioned there, including British officers and men. Large number of graveyards contain the remains of those who were killed in action. Now, so Lord Burgess said to me that he's bringing a group of widows, about 35 to 40 widows, who, some of them very old, in their 80s and 90s, because after all, their husbands were killed in action when they were very young in 1944-45. And their graveyards were lying in India. So all these ladies, old ladies said, before we die, we'd at least like to see the grave of us. So they arranged that the 30, 40 ladies, widows, old ladies, would come visit India. They got sanctioned. and to fly to Delhi. And then they arranged, after payment to Air India and other such airlines, to take them to the eastern regions of Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, and all these places where they wanted to visit the grave. Of course, a number of graveyards in Delhi itself, which they wanted to visit. So they all arrived here. And then Lord Burgess came to my office and he said, General, what we want is if you could have a band or something to assist our final respects to these graves. For instance, you go to the remote areas and you want to do some prayers and you want to pay respects to the dead, then normally we pay the last post and, the reveille and all that, you need some band and all that sort of thing. So we had to take sanction from the foreign ministry. And foreign ministry said that no, we are not going to do any such thing because we are no longer a colony of the British and they can't order us around. I did explain to them that it's not a question of being colony. We have, please be confident enough that you're a free country. But honoring the dead, no matter who they are, is a function that we should assist at. Anyway, they eventually permitted that all right, you can give one bugler, not a band. So I told Lord Burgess, I said, look, we'll arrange something for you. But I told the commanders on the line, the military commanders, Guwahati, Manipur, and Imphal, I said, have about 8 or 10 buglers from the various infantry regiments, so that we give a very good last post and reveille for these people who visit. And we did that for them. And these graveyards are very well maintained. And it's the British Legion who pays for that. If you look at these old graveyards, they're well maintained, and especially the graveyard in Kohima, where one of the largest battles of World War II was fought, which was the final defeat of the Japanese army, which was trying to enter India. And this defense of Kohima was done not only by British troops, but by Indian troops and British Indian troops and Indian troops commanded by Indians and Indian troops commanded by British. It's a very hard-fought battle which lasted, I think, about 10 or 15 days. And to such an extent that the Japanese are very good at making trenches and coming closer and closer to the defensive position. There were times when the Japanese defenses and our defenses were hardly a few yards apart, throwing grenades and all that to each other. Nevertheless, it was a great victory. Many people died on both sides. And when you go to the Kohima, I don't have been to the Kohima graveyard, have you? As you enter Kohima from Dimapur, it's a road, it's a 2.5 hours run. And you come into Kohima, the graveyard, as you enter the town, the graveyard is there on a garden which is got a huge stone embankment near the road. Then there's a very nice saying over there that when you get back home, tell them of us and say that for your tomorrow we gave out today. No matter which country you belong to, the soldier is always respected during battle. When he's ready to give his life for the defense of his land, whether he politically agrees with it or not is not the point. He does that. So he is highly respected. And the British set an example of running these graveyards so well, beautifully kept, lovely lawns, and the local gardeners and local people whom they employ, they pick from the British Legion. Your India Gate in Delhi, for instance, is also maintained by the British Legion. See? So any changes that India wants to do in the design or in the outskirts of that, you have to have sanction from the British Legion because they're paying for it, right? So we give them that compliment. So we did that for them, just between us in the army and them, and they're very grateful. They invited Srupil me to dinner and some of our generals who were here and gave us a very nice dinner before they finally left. Now, another thing is, once you become independent and you decide to have good relations with a country like Britain, they were our colonial masters for 200 years, and yes, they looted us, and they played hell with our economy, and they stole all our goodies, and they had the industrial revolution funded from what they stole from India for 200 years that they were here. But nonetheless, now we are an independent nation, and therefore we have to deal with them. And we do want to be friends with these people. You can't carry the baggage of what happened in the earlier years. You have to look to the future. And if you want good relations, then you have to maintain them in all ways possible. That's my view. And secondly, that in my time, I think the Indian government at that time, it was Rajiv Gandhi's government and the bureaucracy, they were rather uptight about the fact that these are colonials and, we don't want to assist them with anything and all that. So I said, don't have that attitude. Be confident that you're independent and do your best for everybody. I think we are now on a much better relationship. A case arose, a similar case about the Berlin Wall. Now, around about 1989, when I was the chief, the Berlin Wall came down. I don't know if you recollect this history. What happened is that when the Soviet Union was in confrontation with the Western Europe and America, then they had because Berlin was shared, there was a half of Berlin belonging to the Soviets, and the remaining half were divided between America, Britain, and France. As I've told you about this before, about the Berlin airlift and all that. So what the Soviets had done, they had built a wall, huge wall, about 14 feet high, across the whole area between the Soviet-occupied Berlin and the Allied-occupied Berlin. They built the wall because it's interesting. When you have a dictatorial communist system controlling the people, the question arises, are the people happy? Are they free? Are they not? Now, the proof of this pudding is what actually happened on the ground. And what we saw here was that people who were in communist East Germany and in Berlin, many times used to quietly slip across to the West, hand themselves over, seek a job, and try and bring their families over so that they live in a free society, can earn their living happily, rather than be chased around by the communist system, which has the KGB in those days, the intelligence agency and all that, checking out whether you're showing full loyalty or not, and whether you are speaking correctly and all that. I told you the story, I don't know if I did, but I told you the story about the two dogs, which explains this attitude. There was a fat, healthy-looking Soviet dog in those days, well-fed and oozing with health and all that sort of thing. And he met this German dog, which was half-starved and thin and measly. And he said to the German dog, look at your state. Look at me. I'm in the communist country and my food is looked after, paid for by the government, and my exercise is looked after, and I'm living a very happy life. I've got my family. Look at you. You're a miserable specimen of the dog species. So the German dog said, well, I can bark when I want to, but you can't bark. That's the difference between a communist society, which now obtains in China, and the free democratic world where at least you can voice your opinions and open your mouth and talk, whether it's through the press or whether it's in your private discussions. So when this Berlin Wall, what happened was that the Soviet Union decided to start getting rid of the expenses that were because of the Eastern European countries like East Germany and Romania and Hungary were all under the Soviet control. And so they wanted to give freedom to these people. More of this later when I tell you when I visited the Soviet Union and discussed these matters. But the fact is that they decided to allow East Germany to join West Germany. Uh, Reasons being that the Soviet economy was failing, and they felt that if they allow the East European countries who were under the Soviet control, including Ukraine, by the way, they allow them freedom, then those people have to gain funds and things to run themselves, and they can join the West if they wish to. And since the West, like take for instance, West Germany was very well advanced, and people were very well off. Uh, by the time I'm talking of 1980s, this is a good 40 years after World War II. And the American Lend-Lease Agreement and Marshall Plan that I've spoken about earlier had assisted Germany to rise up and create a lot of industrial capability and a lot of financial and economic capability, led by very good leaders. And now their living style and their economy was so well off that they would have to spend a large amount of this financial capability to bring the East Germans up to the same standard of living. And the Soviets at that time felt that this will take Europe not less than 20 years to bring them up to the same level. Meanwhile, the Soviets will develop their economy if they can. Anyway, more of that later when I talk about the Soviet Union. Anyway, the Berlin Wall came down. Why? Because once East Germany became free and they wanted to join West Germany, then the question of a wall did not arise. So they started dismantling the wall, and a large number of people from East German side visited the West German side, tried to seek jobs and things like that. And the Berlin Wall came down, so a lot of celebrations in the West. And all the bands of America, European countries, Britain, and those who had fought World War II got together to have a big band show and all that sort of thing in Berlin. And India was requested to send a band because we also had so many tens of thousands, lakhs of soldiers who fought World War II. The government was a bit reluctant of this because they said that how are we concerned with Europe and all those things, very independent country. Though we in the military did say to them that we'd like to do this because our soldiers, though they were under the British Raj, have lived and fought and died in lakhs. And we as a free country must not forget them. See? Even though they were pre the independence of 1947. But there was some difficulty in convincing the foreign ministry and the political leadership at that time. The question was raised to me that if you want to send a band, firstly, it can't be an army band. It has to be a services band. And second question is how to get the foreign exchange. India was very short foreign exchange in those days. If you want to send 50, 60 people to a band abroad, you have to pay airfares and living expenses and things like that. Now, I had my friend, General Virendra Singh, Major General Virendra Singh, who had retired as the head of the NCC around about the middle 1950s. And he had commanded my regiment, 16 Cavalry. And so he and I were good friends. And he had started the Cheshire Homes in India, which is based on a Lord Cheshire who had started these homes. He was a British bomber pilot. And after his retirement, he became very enthusiastic about doing things for those who are being injured or who have become paraplegics and all that to really contribute to the uplift of the human society, which is down and out. So they started the Cheshire Homes. And General Virendra Singh was the boss of the Cheshire Homes. He had asked me that after I retire, I should join the management also, which I did. So he found that this desire for the Indian band was there. So he spoke to his headquarters in London, and they decided that they will fund the travel of the Indian band in case we agree to send it. So fine. That means our traveling was okay. They managed to spend from England the traveling expenses in pounds sterling. Right. Then the next question the foreign ministry raised was that how are you going to live? I mean, you're going for a week or two, whatever it is, the living expense. So the British chief was a chap called General Sir John Chappell. He 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 later became a field marshal and the chief of defense staff of the British military. He was the army chief at that time. And he had been ringing me to say that he wants to be invited to India because he's very good at shikar. And he wanted to visit the Corbett Tiger Reserve and all that and shoot tigers with a camera, you see. So, because we don't allow tigers to be shot. And that was going on. We were thinking about inviting him. But he said, I'll meet the expenses of the Indian band, provided they come and spend a whole week in London also, because they had the Horse Guards parade for Queen Elizabeth, and they wanted the Indian band to participate. So this is all agreed to, and staying expenses would be looked after with British. Then the French government knew that a lot of fighting in Flanders and Belgium and northern France was done by Indian troops. And a large number of graves there where Indian soldiers also had died. So they also invited the band. So we sent this. So I must tell you about the band. We didn't have an army band. We had large number of regiments and battalions of the Indian Army who have bands, and regimental centers have bands. So I decided to raise an army band as soon as I took over as the chief. That was in 1988. And what I did is I selected the best bandsmen from these various bands because, Republic Day, you have the 29th of January, you have Preaching Retreat. And all the bands come this, you observe them very carefully, and we picked up the best bandsmen, the best drummers, the best buglers, and we raised an army band of some 50 people, 55 people. And the manpower that we took from these various regiments, I sent them extra manpower, allowed them to recruit extra people to train others to replace their band. And we have got a very good army school of music in Pachmari, from the Education Corps. And it's well known all over the world because our bands are trained there, various instruments, etc., and how to play them is trained there. And they're very good. All right. Then we had a Delhi School of Music. I contacted the boss of the Delhi School of Music. They're the ones who give piano recitals, and they also produce choirs, and they produce various plays and operas in India and Gurgaon. And they are doing that, and it's some very good music. They also have choirs which sing on various occasions in the Delhi Gymkhana Club and other places. We contacted this chap, and he said very happy to help us train the coordination of this army band, which we did. Then we had, in those days, Raja Ramanna, who is a famous nuclear scientist. He was there also for the first explosion of the nuclear bomb in 1974 by Indira Gandhi, known as the peaceful nuclear explosion, to show that India has that technology. Raja Ramanna became the RRM, that is the second minister in the Ministry of Defense, number 2 to the defense minister, Raja Rakshamantri. So he had come there, and he and I were very good friends. And he is an international concert pianist, He used to have shows in Kamani Auditorium and so on, which all of us used to go and attend. And a whole lot of public from all over India and Delhi, for that matter, used to hear him playing the grand piano on various classical music. So we asked Raja Ramanna to also help training this band, which he did. And so we had got a good Indian army band. And in fact, to share with you, that particular year, 1989, when we had an inter-band competition between Army, Navy, and Air Force, which normally is won by the naval band. This is won by the naval band because the naval band in those days used, and still is, one of the best in the whole country. They have very good instruments. What happens is they go on board ship, each ship has a band, and they visit various foreign countries, and they buy very good instruments from abroad, because the brass work of instruments that you buy from France or from Britain and other places is of superior quality, so the resonance of the music is better than the slightly poor brass that is available in India, which does not give a tune the type of sound that is necessary for an orchestra. Number two, India has the largest number of bands in the world because every shadi in every village you have a band. So it's not as if we are lacking in people who play various instruments of the band. It's the quality of the instruments I'm talking about. So on that basis, the Navy band was always winning all the prizes. So I determined that this time we must beat them. And we invited the head of the Delhi School of Music as one of the judges, and so also Mr. Raja Ramana was also requested to be one of the judges, and we had two other judges selected by the Navy and the Air Force. And so all these three bands were checked, and sure enough, the Army band won the prize that day, much to the delight of the Army. We didn't keep it up in subsequent years, but we did win that year, 1989. Now, what I did is, for this band going abroad, I requested the Navy and the Air Force to provide certain members of the band. We produced a 55 band. Majority were from Army, but we had some very good players from the Navy and the Air Force. And to appease the Navy, we made the bandmaster the naval chap, which is very good indeed. So having got this band together, we sent them to Berlin. They were very well appreciated there because the first time India had attended a complete Western world organization to celebrate the breaking of the Berlin Wall. So they spent some time there. Then they went to France and they played for the French president for about a week. And then they went to London, hosted and toasted by the British Army, and played at the Horse Guards Parade for Queen Elizabeth. Then they came back very experienced and having bought good instruments also, which managed to get some foreign exchange. This is a story of the Army band. And the result of this is military relationships improve tremendously between these countries when you have an association of bands or visits, ceremonial visits, whatever. That was the Army band. Music has always been a very close part of soldiering. Right from ancient times, when troops go to battle, you had drummers and music to play for them. And in fact, in the British Army, when they were fighting World War II, many of the attacks were led by Scottish pipers because it builds up the morale of hot, good marching music being played as you go into the attack. So the question of, in the old days, when you had to, in the old days, there was no fighting at night. Nowadays, we're fighting 24 hours, but in the old days, you never fought at night. So when the evening came and you had to stop fighting, you played the retreat by buglers and trumpeters so that the troops would know that it's time to disengage from the enemy and retreat to the barracks. Then you have the last post, which is played at night for you to lights out sort of business, go to sleep. And in the morning to wake you up, it is the reveille to wake you up. These are various tunes, slightly different in various countries. British tunes for this reveille and last post and the beating of is similar to, we follow the same. And when you have somebody dying, for instance, you pay the last post because he's no more or she's no more. And having played the last post for that soldier that has died, that means that he's departed. Then you play the reveille after that, after a minute's silence or 2 minutes silence, because the soul has woken up and goes to, as a Viking would call it, Valhalla, or as we call it, you go to heaven. Because those who fight, not because they want to, but because it's their duty, when they die, they go to heaven. All right. At least that's what we believe. So that's the last post of reveille when somebody died. And that's why when the British Legion brought the widows